And let him in. Thanks, Becky. Becky always is one step ahead of me. So welcome, everybody. This is the Utah Title I Directors Meeting. This is our third one of the year, November 29th, 2022. I hope that everybody arrived to their spot or is in a spot where they are warm and dry and safe. My kids are going skiing today, so I know if you, I'll just say this, if you hear me groan or roll my eyes, it's because they're sending me pictures of the powder on the mountain, and they know that that's where I'd also like to be. As I was driving in this morning, I was recalling that I was watching the news last week, and they were showing the storms back east, Buffalo, New York, and they made this comment that a study had been done at the University of Oregon about the first time that they had estimated that snow had fallen on Earth. And they said approximately 2.4 billion years ago was the first snowfall on Earth. And as I drove downtown this morning, all I could think as the other drivers were sliding off the road, going too fast, spinning out, slamming on their brakes and sliding through the intersection, 2.4 billion years we've had this happen. You could have fooled me this morning. Anyway, welcome everybody to the Utah Title I Directors Meeting. Really appreciate you being here. I know this is day 2 after a holiday weekend. When Val and I sat down to calendar these meetings, there was a lot going on in these months. And so we really appreciate you making the time today. This meeting will be recorded and be accessible afterward. And just as a manner of introduction, if those folks from the Utah State Board of Education would either put up a little a reaction hand to raise your hand, or actually raise your hand so the rest of us can look around and see who you are. Good morning, thank you. So here are our folks, here are our team members from USBE who will be supporting us and working with us today as we talk about this meeting. This is the third virtual meeting that we've had this year. Val and I sent out a survey before the spring meeting to ask if you would like to hold these meetings in person, virtual, or some combination of both. And it was pretty much the vast majority that said, as we are still having trouble getting substitutes and staffing our schools, let's continue to do these meetings virtually. So here we are virtually, and we appreciate that attention. Our next meeting after this one isn't until spring. So we'll try to gauge to see what you think about that. We do have it scheduled as a virtual meeting. Okay, let me share my screen again. Okay. Does everybody see my screen? Does it say Utah Title I Directors Meeting? Excellent, thank you. So let me just kind of briefly go over the agenda here with you. Takes just a second for this thing to warm up and try to advance. So we do have a pretty full agenda. We're going to talk about, usually when we schedule these things, we sit down and make a kind of a list of things where the majority of questions have come in between the last time we met and this time. So we've tried to make those things or put those things on the agenda and deal with those. The first thing we'll be talking about just is the 15% carryover waiver. There's been a lot of questions. There have been a lot of questions regarding that, as I don't know if you recall, but we had a couple of years of a worldwide pandemic that really disrupted how we collected data. There were a lot of flexibility waivers and things that came out of the Department of Education. So we'll try to clarify what that means with regards to the Title I 15% carryover waiver. Another piece that has come up since the last time we met was the paraprofessional assessments. And I'll turn the time over to Val at that time. We'll take a short comfort break. Because if you're anything like me, I've had about 18 cups of hot chocolate this morning trying to warm them up internally. And so we're going to need that break. You've probably heard there have been a lot of changes and a lot of information coming out. You may have been contacted or heard from your superintendent or your director about TSI. That communication has been going out, and the Center for Continuous School Improvement has been contacting LEAs with regards to TSI. So we'll turn the time over to James, Dr. James Martin there. And then, as we know, we're still working with our CARES funds. So we'll turn that time over to Sarah. And then I want to talk about an exciting announcement. We have selected our Title I Distinguished Schools this year. So I'll talk about that process briefly and then tell you who those schools are. And then this last piece I'm really excited about, our partnership with LRP Publications for the Title1admin.com. We're going to be partnering with them to provide that resource to everybody in the state. So our colleague Sarah Lynn Branson will be in to talk about that, the launch of it, and the implementation of the Title I admin. I'm going to turn the time over at the end of the meeting to Jeff Ojeda to talk about the teen centers and the next round of funding. And then, of course, at noon, as we have done the last number of meetings, those folks, USBE colleagues who are over programs or funding sources, we'll hang out so that if you have personal questions that are specific to you or specific to your school or your LEA, we can be there and hopefully answer those questions or at least note them down so that we can go find answers for you. And then we'll wrap it up around then. So anybody have any amazing anecdotes, stories, jokes before we get started, before we dive right in here? Good enough. What? I hear somebody? Somebody had something? Okay. So I like to do this, and I appreciate you entertaining me in this piece at the beginning of each of these meetings, because it helps me set the context when we're here talking specifically about Title I Part A, the improving the academic achievement of the disadvantaged. This is cut and pasted right out of the statute. The purpose of this title is to provide all children significant opportunity to receive a fair, equitable, high-quality education and to close educational achievement gaps. Title I is a funding source. Congress set aside this past year around $17 billion to complete this purpose, this particular goal. As you know, the piece that this goal or this funding is directed towards is a specific barrier that historically has been identified to cause difficulty in all children having that equitable, high-quality education and to close achievement gaps. And of course, we're talking about this money goes towards areas, communities, schools, and LEAs that experience high economic disadvantage. Utah received this past year $74 million to achieve those goals, and specifically these bullet points: to help students in proficiency and growth, close achievement gaps, building teacher and educator capacity, engaging parents and communities in the education of those students. So not only showing up at school for student parent-teacher conferences, but also being engaged in the education, the learning experience of their students, knowing what's going on and being able to support that, and providing a well-rounded education for students. These bullet points all lead to something that is kind of a process that is delineated in the Title I law. And there are some requirements to get to be able to achieve these goals. It's required that we assess the needs of our students in our schools. It's helpful to depend, so we assess needs to determine where students are having difficulty, where students are achieving and growing, and then the root cause analysis to determine why. If we know where students are struggling, the next step is to figure out why are they struggling. If students are really succeeding in an area, why are they succeeding in that area, and is it something we can duplicate? then we plan towards those needs. Why are they low? What strategies, what interventions, what actions can we take that are going to address that why? Where are they succeeding? Where are things going well? And what strategies are we going to duplicate that are working in those schools? And then, of course, monitoring. This, I'll always remember Dr. Becky Donaldson. She would say this at the beginning of every meeting, and she said it so often that I think it's spread throughout our entire agency. Our goal is to fund our plan. So we know what kids need, we know what we need to do to address those needs, and then we go out looking for the resources to provide for those things. Fund your plan, don't plan for funds. Okay, as I said at the beginning, when we put together these Title I directors meetings, we try very hard to address the things that have come up between the last meeting and this meeting more often than not. So one of those things on that list, because it has been kind of complicated with regards to some waivers that were provided by the Department of Education and with regards to moving forward in the situation we are currently with the big reduction in Title I funds. So I'm going to talk about the 15% carryover waiver. Also, that we are pursuing another waiver from the federal government regarding that 15% once every 3 years. I put Tammy on here because oftentimes she has to step in and correct me where I go astray and run off the track. So Tammy, feel free to stop me and go, no, no. Okay, so the General Education Provisions Act allows for every federal program, education program, 27 months to obligate those federal funds. So the first is a 15-month period because funds are awarded at the 1st of July. That goes until October 1st. And then there is an additional 12 months to September 30th of the following year to expend those funds. And that's true of all federal funds to have that carryover, that tidings amendment, except Title I has a provision in it. Title I, Section 1127, limits the amount that an LEA can carry over from year to year to 15%. So in that initial 15 months and the additional 12 months, the law requires or limits that carryover amount to 15%. However, an LEA can apply or request a waiver to that once every 3 years, to that 15% once every 3 years. And there is that bottom caveat. Funds that are over that 15% allocation or do not get expended, we try to reallocate those. Funds that are not expended by the state of Utah are returned to the Treasury. And please, should you have questions or comments, put them in the chat and I'll ask one of my USBE member friends to notify me or just come off mute. We're all friends here. So there is a caveat to that request for a waiver once every 3 years. So you request that to the state. The state has to determine whether it's reasonable or necessary, or if there have been additional funds that have become available that are available to LEAs in the state. So if you're an LEA that receives additional funds, and we're hoping that can happen, it hasn't happened this year. So if it's reasonable, necessary, or there have been not additional funds or additional funds have become available, then we can grant that waiver once every 3 years. All of that is true in a normal year. And it looks a little bit like this. I put this slide in just as an example. I thought it was kind of, I think I stole this off of some presentation that was done by OESC, the Office of Education. So funds that became available on July 1st. So you have $1 million, that's 100% of the obligation. And I'm going to read it to you, but 15% would be your obligated minimum obligation, $850,000. The amount you could carry over to the next year, should you not expend that, would be $150,000, which is 15%. And then those other three categories are just an example. So if you had 20% left over, you had $200,000 that you had not expended, you would need to request a waiver to expend or carry over more than the 15% in that final line. So you'd be asking for $50,000 to carry over. So what does that look like in the timeline? For example, in this top category, I put federal fiscal year 20. Federal fiscal years are always confusing to me, so I always try to translate those into school years. So I put the school years down here. So if you had more than 15% that you needed to carry over and you requested a waiver for the 21-22 school year, then the next time that you could request a waiver would be the 24-25 school year. That's just an example. That's once in 3 years. So here's where it has become a little bit confusing. Carryover in COVID times. So in July of 2021, OESE sent out an invitation to all superintendents and program directors for Title I that we could request to waive that once every 3 years, if necessary, for the federal fiscal year 20. So the 21-22 school years. So FY20, those funds, those 12 months of carryover funds would have become necessary October 1st of 2021. It was a one-time waiver. Utah did apply for that waiver. And in September 10th of that same year, we were granted that waiver. And what it said was for federal fiscal year 20, 21, 22, we could allow any LEA, regardless of whether they had requested a carryover waiver in federal fiscal year 2018 or federal fiscal year 2019, they could request a waiver of more than 15% for federal fiscal year 20. So the 21-22 school year. Again, that was a one-time offer from the Department of Education. So what that means that what I just said, in 21-22 school year, all EAs could have been granted a carryover waiver regardless of their once in 3 year status. So if they had carried over the year before or 2 years before, you could have been granted that carryover if it was reasonable and necessary in the federal fiscal year 20. What it doesn't mean is that that one-time flexibility waiver from the Department of Education continued after that. So 21-22 school year, if you took that option to carry over in federal fiscal year 20, so 21-22, that means you now have to wait 3 years to request the carryover waiver again. So just as an example, 21-22, we received the waiver. If you requested that and it was granted, the next time you could carry that waiver or request the waiver would be 2024. Okay, this is in normal times. As we've talked about the last 2 times we met, Utah has experienced a dramatic decrease in Title I allocation. So we went from 21-22 from 87 million to 22-23, 74 million. That's a $13 million decrease. Because of the way Title I allocations are determined at a state, each LEA's allocation is determined by the Department of Education, Census Bureau data independently. So this big decrease in funds affected some LEAs more than it affected others. It really depended on how that Census Bureau data was collected, reported, and those funds were allocated. So we were contacted by a number of districts who had Title I allocations last year. Because of the decrease in funds, they didn't get a new Title I allocation this year, or some LEAs who received a drastic decrease. So the services, resources, FTE staffing that were used to provide for students in those Title I schools would really drop off. And if they couldn't carry some of those funds over and access some of the other resources that are available, like CARES funds, to kind of mitigate some of that drastic drop off. But if they couldn't carry over the funds more than once every 3 years, then that drop off would be pretty substantial. Staff would have to be moved or waived or let go. Resources that were purchased with Title I funds or programs that were paid for with Title I funds would drop off in those schools. So in those conversations, what we decided to do as a state was to enact Part B, Section 8401, and request from the Secretary of Education and the Department of Education an additional waiver. So we have started that process of putting in a waiver so that we can offer to LEAs that have experienced this drastic drop off in Title I funds the opportunity to carry Title I funds over more often than once every 3 years to mitigate those loss of resources, staff, etc. So this is what we have done. So on October 17th, we presented the request to apply to the Department of Education for a waiver from the superintendency, the USBE superintendency. That was approved. In the USBE Finance Committee on November 4th, it was again presented and the Finance Committee approved us requesting the waiver. So this week, we will be requesting from the state board in general their consent to have us continue on and request this waiver from the Department of Education. So next it will go, we're going to ask feedback from the Committee of Practitioners. And the reason we're going to do this, and I will probably reach out to you folks to ask for additional comments, because in the submission of the letter, we have to attach all of the feedback and comments we received. So they use that kind of to gauge I guess, the extent of the need in Utah and the severity of the need. So during the USBE Finance Committee, if you guys recall, and you probably get so many emails you might not have, but I sent out a link to contact USBE to provide comments for the Finance Committee to review. One of our more outspoken LEAs, Assistant Superintendent Zerbakken from Davis District, and Sue Caldwell, thanks Sue, were both there at the Finance Committee and were available to talk directly to that Finance Committee. And their comments and the example of the needs that it caused and the necessity to be able to carry Title I of funds over really was the key, I think, to having the Finance Committee approve that. So again, the end of this week, it will go before the board to review. I will be there. It's public meeting. If you want to attend, it's also on YouTube. I think those links are sent out to all LEAs. I will send it out to the Committee of Practitioners. And if I send out for some feedback, a quick survey to you, and you have some feelings about it, or if it might be necessary for your LEA, please provide those comments, because I will submit those in the letter to the Secretary of Education and the Department of Education to allow for us to ask for a waiver of the 15% carryover more often than once every 3 years. We'll be asking for federal fiscal year 22, which is the 23-24 school year, and federal fiscal year 23, which is the 2024-2025 school year. What questions do you have about Title I carryover? Okay, again, and this, this PowerPoint will be available, and contact me or contact a member of our team if you have additional questions or questions when the last time that your LEA requested a carryover waiver, if you're eligible to request a carryover waiver, and I will keep you all in the loop about how this request from the Department of Education goes and where we are with that. At this time, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to turn the time over and the screen over to Val Murdoch. Well, that was quick, Val.
Don't you remember, we practiced this transition. Good morning, everyone. It's so great to see all of you here. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to listen to exciting topics like carryover and paraprofessional assessments. And I also appreciate all of those who answered the survey, completed the survey, because at the state, we're in a very unique position. It feels like a middle person situation where the state, the board, has to approve paraprofessional assessments, and LEAs have to ensure that paraprofessionals are highly qualified, whether that's through education or whether it's through one of these assessments. And I don't, like, I connect the dots, but I don't really have anything to do with this. And so that's why I sent out the survey, because you all are very knowledgeable about the assessments. Some of you have even started to utilize one or more of the new assessments. And so I do appreciate that feedback that you gave, because I am completely out of the situation, except to hopefully collect information and feedback so that you can make the best decision for your LEA. Also know that at the state, we're in no position to recommend one of the assessments over another. So again, another great reason for those LEAs who responded to the survey. And if any of you have feedback that you want to share after I provide the survey results, then we have time for that. I do appreciate those of you who have volunteered to speak to your experience as well. Okay, Max isn't here to move the slides along. So why are we discussing this? And for some of you, it might be, again, why are we discussing this again? And for others, it might be, I've not heard of this. In last June, when many of you were kind of calming down from the school year and getting ready for the next school year and not really paying attention to emails, particularly from ETS, but they announced that they would have a major change, and that in July, the following month, they were doing away with allowing LEAs to administer the assessment, the Parapro assessment at their district or at their charter offices. They were doing away with that, and they were forcing paraprofessionals to either go to a prometric testing center, which there are only, I think, 3 in the state of Utah, or take it at home. And so that that was quite difficult to be able to do for many of our rural school districts and charters especially. So June through August, we scrambled to assure that we could find some options that we thought were as good as the Parapro. And we were able to get those approved by the Law and Licensing Committee in September and by the full board in October. And you all know that a government agency like the State Board of Education does not move this quickly usually. And so we were very excited to be able to offer some options for those who are not able to continue to use the Parapro. So over the last 5 months, we've had 2 trainings, and those were recorded from the new testing publishers, so that you could ask them questions and you could get information directly from them. There was a comparison chart sent out multiple times showing some of the major differences of the 3 assessments, and assessment documentation was sent out from me as well as the testing publishers, as well as multiple email notifications. But like Max just said, you get so many emails that sometimes it's hard to pay attention to those that you really need to and ignore those you don't need to. I have assembled all of these in a folder, and I will share that folder with you. In that Google folder, you'll be able to see the 3 different tests, and you'll see the information related to each of the 3 tests in their respective folders. It was interesting. I didn't think that a survey would serve as formative assessment, but sure did. And I discovered that there were 3 major misconceptions when people responded to the survey. Misconception number one, the Parapro assessment is going away forever at the end of December. I'm not sure how people got that message, but many people thought that. Actually, the Parapro assessment by ETS, the original one that we were using, will continue to be available after December 23rd, which was the original date. So you can see that ETS has made a lot of changes after that initial announcement in June. They've pulled back so much that you'll see in this next misconception that they kind of almost done a U-turn. Misconception number two, the only place to take the Parapro is at one of those Prometric testing centers or at home. I was forwarded an email, so like I told you, I don't receive any information from the test, from ETS, from Master Teacher. I'm completely out of that picture. But our Director of Licensing, Dr. Malia Height, forwarded me this message from ETS that so that we can explore additional options that might provide a better testing experience for Parapro IBT. This is the internet-based testing that you're able to do from your offices. For Parapro IBT test takers, we are extending the availability of the testing through late spring. So those of you who are scrambling, you still have through the spring while ETS makes their next step to continue utilizing the internet-based testing platform at your offices, at your LEA offices. So Darlene, I hope that answered your question. That I don't know what once you purchase those tests from ETS, is there a deadline, a due date, like an expiration date of those? If not, then those 50 assessments should still be good that you pre-purchased. Okay. So again, that was from the email from ETS. I don't know if you all received that one or not, but that was sent just a week ago. The third misconception, using board-approved assessments is optional. Now, nobody came right out and said, what? Do we really have to use one of these tests? But I'll show you in a minute why I think this could be a misconception. 25% selected our LEA does not use any of the assessments. To me, if a quarter of our LEAs, a quarter at least that responded to the survey, don't use any of the assessments, then that means one of two things. Either you don't have any paraprofessionals. So in a school-wide program, it means 0 paraprofessionals at all. In a targeted assistance program, that means no paras are paid with Title I funds. Or you only hire paras with a college degree or enough credits. And there are some LEAs that do have this requirement. So they avoid testing altogether because they only hire those that meet the education requirements. Okay, so if you answer yes to one of these, then you're fine not using the assessment. But if you hire paraprofessionals to work in your Title I program, or you hire those without the requisite education, then you need to be using one of the three. So let's get into this one more. This is the latest update of the grid, the comparison grid. So we have our 3 assessments, the Parapro assessment. I put them in the same order just to reduce the confusion with the names being so similar. The Paraeducator by Master Teacher and Project Para. This grid is in your folder, in the Google folder that I just shared with you in the chat. So you can look over those if you're still trying to decide. The link to some information on Parapro is there. The link to last September's Title I Directors Meeting was removed by YouTube for bullying and harassment. So whoever reported that for bullying and harassment, we're still trying to get it reinstated. So as soon as we get that, hopefully we get that link, I'll plug that in here so that you can go back if you need to and listen to that portion of the Title I Directors Meeting. And then Project Para, we had that training by Dr. Guy Trainin. And that was a standalone training, and nobody reported that for bullying and harassment. So that's still available for you to watch as well. Now, I would like you to put on your 7th grade predicting cap, because 7th graders are excellent at predicting. And we know that this purple portion of the pie, this 24.5, are those who responded, we don't use any assessment. I want you to predict, what do you think this blue piece of the pie is? Is it those who went with the Parapro, that stayed with the Parapro? Do you think it's those who moved to the Paraeducator by Master Teacher? Or do you think it's those who moved to Project Para by the University of Nebraska at Lincoln? You can put your answer in the chat, or you can just keep it in your mind. Thanks, Kendra. I love people who actually guess in the chat, because you're true 7th graders at heart. We got Project Para, we got Paraeducator. Those who haven't decided, oh, Linda, thank you for bringing that up. That was one of the choices too, Project Para. Okay, so I think, okay, wow. You would think it would be one of the new tests, but it's not. The 34% are those who are still with Parapro Praxis. Again, 24 don't use any of the assessments, and it was evenly split between the two new ones. I believe that 9 respondents equals 17%, 9 respondents. And 34 are still with Parapro. So let's see, why are they still with Parapro? Well, 50% are still using it through the end of December, and then they might switch, or they will switch. And another almost 17% said we just haven't had the time to look into the options. And some were unaware that there were other options. And that was the only assessment available at the time. So you see 22% are satisfied with the Parapro, and those changes that ETS made are not going to impact the administration. So we see about 25% are going to stick with it for sure. Here's the feedback provided by those who responded to the survey. At one time, this was a cost-effective option and an easy way for small rural LEAs to provide the HQ, highly qualified status of paras working in Title I schools. I'm concerned about the options that are proposed to take its place. ETS system changes have made testing cumbersome and challenging. Rural districts need the option of testing in-house. The restriction and constraints made on testing environment has made it extremely difficult. Okay. Let's move on to the master teacher. That's the second assessment that was board approved. What has been your experience with using the Paraeducator assessment so far? Out of those 9 responses, it is 44.4. 4 said, so far it's going well, and we plan on continuing to use that Paraeducator. Another 4 said, we have not had a need yet to use it. And then the green is the write-in. One person said, we have just gotten everyone set up, and they were going to administer it right after Thanksgiving, so this week. So if that person is here today and they want to comment on their experience by master teacher, then I would love for you to join in the conversation. The written feedback on the Paraeducator by master teacher, number 2, our principals are excited to move to this new model, especially because they do not have to pay for retakes, and the paras do not need to wait 30 days after failing an exam to retake it. This platform is so smooth, and the support for paras is exceptional. We are switching to it at the beginning of the year because of cost, and that cost also includes test preparation. If you noticed on the comparison grid, the Parapro, there are some free materials, but to get some more in-depth training materials costs an additional $19 per person. Great customer service, easy log on. The paras only have to retake the section they didn't pass rather than the entire test. The retest can be immediate, but I mean, they don't have to take it immediately, but they could. And there is online support to help the paras pass the test. I don't think it's online cheating support. I'm not sure exactly what that support is, but this LEA highly recommends the para educator by master teacher. Now, we had a monitoring visit with Cache County School District 2 weeks ago. And thank you to Robin and to Paula for providing specific feedback that I could share. Cache County had my first monitoring visit with them was 5 years ago. And one of the few things that I stuck in my mind that I could not forget was the struggles and the challenges that Cache had with software and hardware for setting up the computers for paras to take it. They continually struggled with ETS's requirements there. And so they were breathing a sigh of relief because their paraprofessionals can use Chromebooks. They don't have to use a computer, that the retakes are only on the sections missed. And the next piece of feedback I think is really important if you are thinking about moving to the para educator, that some of the modules might be necessary to assign para educators so that they can understand that education jargon that many of us learned while we were getting our degrees. So you might want to look into that. We asked our principals, so Cash just said, hey, principals, make sure that you set aside 2 hours paid study time for paras so that they can prepare for the test. So again, maybe something that you hadn't thought of that you might incorporate with any one of the 3 tests. And then according to Cache, tracking data is so easy. Both Robin and Paula said that I could share their email addresses and home phone numbers so that if you have questions, you can contact them. I'm just kidding about the home phone number. But there are their email addresses. If you have specific questions about the para educator, you can contact them. Moving on to our 3rd test. This is the Project Para by University of Nebraska at Lincoln. Again, the same number of LEAs responded that they started using the Project Para as those that indicated they started using the para educator. I'm just practicing the test names so I can get it down. So you see here, that's 5 respondents said, so far it's going well and we will continue using the test. There was one, this goal, this 11.1%, one person said that after using Project Para, we determined it's not the best fit for us and we will use one of the other 2 assessments, but they didn't put why. So if you're here today, maybe you could share that. And then our paras have not yet started was a write-in that goes along with this 22%. We have not had the need to use the assessment yet. The written feedback, I appreciate the ability to use Project Para for our charter school. I have found it very difficult to access the other options, and this is a great fit. I really like that there are modules on assisting students with math, writing, and reading. So that classroom instruction piece, and not just on the content knowledge. My only complaint is that on the content exams, the correct answers are shown after completing the test. So this person would rather that they were only marked incorrect rather than giving the para the actual answer. Additional feedback on this test, we watched and found great value in their training videos. Now this, again, going back to the survey as a formative assessment, I don't know that this LEA was actually talking about this test because I don't think the University of Nebraska at Lincoln has videos. Can anyone correct me or confirm that?
I don't believe that they do. I haven't seen any. This is Heidi.
Thanks, Heidi, and thanks, Keisha, who will be sharing Washington County School District's experience with Project Para. So So I believe this response was actually about the assessment prior to this, the paraeducator. So far, we have only registered 3 new paraprofessionals in Project Para. They were just hired and the registration process was quick and easy. And our HR rep has had to create detailed instructions to help our potential paras navigate Project Para. They seem to be working well. And that last comment was made by Keisha Schultz, who works in HR at Washington County School District. And Keisha, first of all, correct me if I'm saying your name wrong. And secondly, will you just add the experiences that you've had so far administering Project Para?
Sure. And yes, you're saying my name correct. So thank you. So we've been using Project Para since around October 20th or 21st. We implemented it and stopped using the ETS Parapro assessment. The first thing I did was go into the system and take the test myself as if I was a candidate, a paraprofessional that needed to take it, because I wanted to experience it, see how long it would take, and see if I needed to write up any instructions for our paras as they navigate through the system. And as I was going through, there were some confusing areas just because the Project Para does have 3 sections. It has the Title I, the early childhood, and the, I believe, special ed. And the only one we were interested in using was the Title I portion. So I took my experience taking the test and wrote up some detailed instructions for our candidates as far as how to navigate the system, which tests they needed to take, what was required, because there are lots of activities and lessons. There is a pre-test, a post-test, and an evaluation for each section or each module. And I wanted to make sure that they understood, okay, these sections, while we suggest you do all of it, these are the sections that you actually have to complete. So we implemented it, and it seems to be working great for us. We actually like that it gives them the correct answer if they get it wrong. But as far as the test is concerned, there was a little bit of delay in the paraeducator getting the certificate when they finished, saying that they had completed that Title I module successfully. But we've worked through that, and it seems to be going a little quicker now. So we haven't had any problems. Our instructions seem to be working. Of course, you have some that don't read the instructions and they end up taking all 3 modules, even though they didn't need to, all 3 sections, even though they didn't need to. But other than that, it's working out pretty good.
Thank you so much. I'm laughing at the not following instructions.
Yeah.
Keisha, may I ask a question? This is Heidi from Davis.
Sure.
Are you allowing them to use a calculator on the math section? I couldn't find that anywhere. And I've reached out, but I haven't heard back. So I'm just kind of curious.
Yes, we're allowing them to use a calculator because they're actually taking the Project Para tests remotely from home.
Okay, so you're allowing them to just be on their honor system.
Right, because once I took the test, I saw it was giving them the correct answers anyway. So
Yeah.
there's no point in doing it the other way.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. It's just always nice hearing how others are doing it, so it's somewhat consistent and, you know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And since Keisha's agreed to be here and share experience, are there other questions about this one, especially the Project Para? You can unmute or put it in the chat.
I think we've had around 40 paraprofessionals take it now since we started.
And in the chat, would you be willing to share? Okay, I'll answer this for you. Keisha actually did share the instructions. And as I was reading over them, I had a question. So I wanted to meet with Keisha and maybe Amy, who's a Title I director in Washington, before sharing that, just to make sure that the requirements of any the highly qualified, the NCLB, which were continued in the Every Student Succeeds Act, those requirements are being met in the way that the test is being administered. So yes, Darlene, those steps will be coming soon, just after we have a chance to clarify them.
I have a question. So when you're doing the test online and they're doing it at home, is someone monitoring them on camera at home, or are they just taking it and then you submit the answers later?
They're just taking it, and it's giving them a certificate. It tells them the percentage they get on the post tests and the content assessments, the 3 content assessments. So we can see the percentages for each section if we needed to, but it gives them an overall percentage also at the end and gives them, so we don't monitor it. Again, Project Para, when you take the test and you answer the questions, whatever you get wrong is going to tell you what the correct answer is anyway. So we're not monitoring them taking or proctoring the exams.
Okay, thank you. I haven't looked into it that closely, so thank you for answering that.
You're welcome.
Keisha, I guess I would just assume that you feel confident that taking this assessment at home is really determining whether they are highly qualified or not.
Yes, because of the plans, the lessons that they have to go through before they even get to the post test and the content assessments, it's very detailed. There are several assessment lessons included. There are several activities in each section included. For me, it was difficult taking the post test, trying to skip through the lessons. I actually had to go back for one section and go through every lesson before taking the post test. So I do feel like they're meeting that highly qualified status by going through the lessons and then getting satisfactory on the post test.
Okay. What would you say is the pass rate the first time they take those exams?
So I'm only aware of one person that had to retake it. And it was because of one particular module. I believe it was the math module. He just scored too low, so the overall percentage was too low. But out of the 40 candidates, I'm only aware of one that had that situation.
Okay. And just like the paraeducator, where people were saying they only had to take the section they missed, I believe that's true for the Project Para as well, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Other questions about Project Para in Washington County? What a great resource. Keisha, can people contact you if they have questions?
Sure, I'll put my email address in the chat along with my phone number.
Wow, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm just going to go back to the slide where we see the comparisons and see if anybody has any feedback or questions on any of the assessments. I think we have about 20 minutes left, but we don't need to take it. Well, that sounds like everybody's made up their minds. So once again, I've just put in the folder where you can find all of the documentation that I've been able to find for these 3 assessments. And if you have questions later on, just let me know. And shout out to Robin, who in Cache County is retiring in a couple of weeks. So if you want to reach out to Cache, you can only contact Robin for the next couple of weeks before she retires onto the ski hill. And then Paula will be able to answer your questions.
Thanks, Val. For what it's worth, my daughters have sent me 4 pictures of the powder today at the ski resort. So Robin, in a couple of weeks, that's where you should be. Okay, I don't know about you folks, but I'm about 6 hot cups of hot chocolate in. We're a bit early on the agenda, but if it's okay with you, let's take a break, a comfort break now, mostly because I need to take a comfort break right now. So it's 9:30. 10 minutes, and that will give us time to connect with our friends from the Center for Continuous School Improvement. And we come back at 9:40. We'll pick up with school improvement. Dr. Fern, I saw that you're on the meeting. On the agenda, I listed James. I don't know which of you is going to be presenting the school improvement bits on TSI. And Greg, if you're talking, you're on mute. Okay, we will connect. Let's take a break until 9:40, and then at that time, we'll pick up and we'll turn the time over to our friends in the Center for Continuous School Improvement. Thank you much. I hope that your 10 minutes was used wisely. Mine sure was. I also got just the chance to talk to my pal, Dr. Greg Fern over there, walked by, and it was nice to see him. I'd like to turn the time over, and I think Dr. James Martin is jumping on, but if he's just getting on to the meeting now, I want to turn the time over to Dr. Greg Fern just to start off the conversation. You may have had your director or your superintendent have a conversation with you about targeted support and improvement schools, which is one of the initiatives for school improvement under ESSA. I know our friends in the Center for Continuous School Improvement have been making those conversations with superintendents and district directors, but the list is extensive, so they're still working through that. So if you've had that conversation, this is what they're talking about. And Greg, I'll turn the time over to you. I have the slides here and I can move them forward for you. And then when Dr. Martin gets on, you can turn the time over to him, or he can choose to keep the spotlight on you.
Well, absolutely. We'll get started. I know that actually, speaking of which, Dr. Martin is actually meeting with the school in LEA right now, going through their data. So, but I'll be happy to. So we'll wing this on a snowy day in Salt Lake City. So appreciate the opportunity. And as always, the Center for Continuous School Improvement is part of the USBE, and our role is really to support you at the LEA level, both with your TSI Title I schools and your TSI non-Title I schools. So today is meant to provide just some information and ongoing context for this work on school improvement. So our learning intentions today are really to look at the key requirements of TSI under the ESSA Act. And as you know, are familiar with, that most, if not all, of what we do in the area of school improvement is informed by our plan with the U.S. Department of Education. And then lastly, learning intent is to find, analyze, and plan for student group improvement using TSI data on the USBE website. And I know some of you have already reached out and have asked, when will the 2022 designations be posted? The answer to that is that once we have met with and have walked through the data with each of the LEAs at the superintendency level and or with their principals. So that is why it hasn't been posted as of yet. So a school is identified. I'm sorry?
I think that was just background noise. Sorry.
Okay, thought there was a question. A school will be identified if for 2 consecutive years, any of its student groups fall below the percentage of points associated with the lowest performing 5% of schools in the state's accountability system. And I know this can be confusing to some if they're not familiar with this, but we take all of the schools and they are rank ordered based on their performance and the points that are accumulated based on our accountability model. And then we establish a cut score of what is the lowest 5% and above and or above that in the 95%. And Interestingly enough, since we have started this, there has been some slight deviation in terms of what that cut score has been. In this last year, we saw it actually rise from approximately 35% to 40% in terms of where that cut actually exists. And that cut score is a moving target. So every year it could be slightly different because it is based on the overall performance of all schools in the state of Utah. So when we look at the actual student groups, next slide, please, Max. So we become more familiar with this as we have been working with this. And part of our conversation, meaning Dr. Martin and or myself or someone else from the Center for Continuous Improvement, we have just reminded the LEAs of these student group designations. But there are students that are identified as economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, students that are identified as English learners, and then the major racial or ethnic groups. And as a quick reminder is that you must have at least 10 students or an N of 10 to have this group calculated. So in other words, if you do not have an N of 10, you would be, and even if you tested in the lowest 5%, it would be a null, or it would not count against you, or a school can be removed from TSI, not exited, but they would remove because they did not have the N size to calculate that particular score. So we do know that TSI schools are identified annually, and they were not identified in the years 2019-20 or 2021. So they're identified annually. So those schools that, or the LEAs that we've been talking with this year, with schools that are identified based on 2022 data, is that it's kind of an advanced warning or an alert. Hey, this school has been identified, but remember, they have to have 2 years to be identified and to start their clock, if you will, in terms of to exit. So each LEA, as you are keenly aware, is responsible to create and to implement school level improvements for each school group identified. And that plan does not need to be submitted to the USBE. And again, it's according to the Utah's ESSA state plan. Question in the chat. Thank you, Wendy, and a shout out for Canyons. So when you say, the question is, so when you say they are removed because their N size is less than 10, but they were already in TSI status, do they get an extra year to exit? No, they are actually removed from TSI status. If in the following year there was an N size of greater than 10 and they did fall in that lower 5%, they would start a new clock or a new cohort to exit. So the breakdown of student groups are as follows, and this is just a reminder, but what we have found, and it's very interesting, that 40% of the students with disabilities in terms of our TSI breakdown, so 40% of those schools that have been identified for TSI have been identified with students with disabilities. And you can see the multilingual learners, or EL, followed by the following groups. So we are keenly aware that students with disabilities and our EL or multilingual learners are the two largest groups of students that have been found to be performing in that lower 5% or for TSI designation. And you can see the others as they are broken down. And yes, it is possible for a student to be a multilingual learner and also be identified in one of the ethnic groups. I know that sometimes can be challenging, but we explain that when we have those conversations with each of the LEAs and their schools. So the indicator points that is contained in our technical manual are as follows. And we at the USBE are going to do a much better job of providing the data and results in a way that makes sense for the LEAs and schools. So for example, when we know achievement constitutes 56 points, you see where growth, you see EL progress, and the growth of the lowest performing 25% for a total of 150 points at the elementary and the middle school level. And just to point out that when we talk about growth of the lowest performing 25%, that is growth based on your district or your school's performance the previous year. So that is looking at that particular school within that LEA in terms of the performance of the lowest 25% from the year previous. So when we look at high school, It's slightly different because now we add in achievement growth, the EL progress are the same, growth of the lowest performing, and then we have post-secondary readiness. So it totals 225 points. And we know that post-secondary readiness includes, but it's not limited to, AP courses, concurrent enrollment, CTE completer. Those are all indices within the post-secondary readiness. But again, for high school, it's 225 points. So when we look at, yes, thank you, Jandy. The question is for elementary, when you say performance, do you mean on rise? Yes, on rise. And we know EL, so let's go ahead and go forward. So the proficiency indicators, and again, for those of you that unfortunately that may be like myself or Dr. Strong, that we like statistics, we kind of get really jiggy about these formulas. But just so that you know, there actually is a method to the madness in terms of how things are calculated. So for example, on achievement or the proficiency indicator, it's broken down into 3 areas: ELA, math, and science, each with an 18.67 points or a total of 56 points in the area of achievement and proficiency. So you can see how it's eventually, or excuse me, initially it was divided in thirds, and it will remain that way until such time that the plan is changed. So that's how the achievement proficiency indicator. So what we will be doing going forward is we actually will be breaking this down in a more granular presentation to actually show where a particular school has performed in each of those 3 areas: ELA, math, and science. So when we look at growth indicators.
And Dr. Fern, Wendy has a question in the chat. How are CTE completer courses reported to the state? We're finding that this information isn't being reported accurately.
Yeah, Wendy, great question. And I'm going to, if I may, I'm going to kind of park this question on the side. I will come back and answer it or provide everyone an answer through Dr. Strong, especially if we've got some inaccuracies. And we'll say in all humility, we have found some anomalies in some areas where there has been some discrepancy about data, and we're trying to do a better job, obviously, of providing that to you. So let me, if I can, let me put that on hold for a second, and we'll see if we can revisit that. If not, I will provide a response to everyone through Dr. Strong. So when you look at the growth indicator, again, there's 56 points possible, and you can see how it's broken down there, but it's calculated by whether a student did or did not meet the student growth target or their SGT, and the amount of growth the student made as determined by their student growth percentile. So this is where it starts to get very individualized with respect to a particular school and to a particular student. So these again are based on RISE scores, and you can see how it's broken down in terms of the SGT and the SGP. With respect to how the growth indicator is calculated. So then when we look at the growth of the lowest 25%, as I indicated previously, this is based on the previous year performance in terms of identifying the lowest 25% and if there was improvement in this area. So we know that, again, this is very important, but it's very, very specific to the previous year's performance. And then for example, in 22, their performance will be used to calculate the lowest 25% for 23 and to see where that improvement is. And of course, that's where we obviously each of us and every one of us want to see growth in this area. So when we look at the English Learner Progress Indicator, we know the WIDA is used for academic language development and proficiency in English. And this is where WIDA plays in. But it's important to note that WIDA does not measure academic proficiency in the content area or the Utah core standards. WIDA is used explicitly as a progress indicator for those students that are eligible and qualify under the ELL or ELP progress area. So then therefore, how is it calculated? Well, 13 points are the points calculated. It's adequate progress for ELs is determined by charts in the Accountability Technical Manual. So, and that is available online. It's posted and updated annually. And we can certainly, at the bottom of this, you can see we provide the link for you. But the progress charts consider the student's initial grade level, the initial English language proficiency level, and time enrolled in school with supportive English instruction. So those are key factors that go into the calculus of determining progress for our EL learners. Great question in the chat of how do we find out initial grade level, initial proficiency levels of the student. And I will, I think, yield, again, that question as a follow-up, so I can provide a written explanation for you, also citing specifically where that language comes from. And the answer is, to the question, is the slide deck going to be provided? Absolutely. These will be made available to each and every one of you. So I have two things, Max. I got to make sure I don't forget. I have two follow-ups, one on CTE completer, as well as determination of status of an EL learner.
And I'll try to remember to remind you.
Or Becky will. She will not let us off the hook here.
Right.
So my apologies. So that's how that is how the progress indicator for English learners is identified. For post-secondary readiness, and this might answer our question with respect to, no, it will not answer my question, but 75 points are possible. You have the graduation rate, you have the ACT, and the readiness coursework. That readiness coursework, I believe, is where the CTE completer and concurrent enrollment data points are nested. But I will provide you the specific language to that as a follow-up. So that's post-secondary readiness for our high schools. So as we move through, how are schools therefore identified on an annual basis? So we know new schools were identified in 2019-20 and 2021. So that's with the conversations that we've been having with the LEAs and schools. You will hear us reference 2018 and 2019 data, and then 2022. So there are some gaps in that. And as some of you are familiar, we have a board, not the USBE board, but we have a sub board that actually looks at accountability and assessment and provides us guidance. It's called the APAC committee. So we are then ready, once schools are identified, they become part of a cohort. And at cohort, they have 4 years to exit from TSI status. They must have 2 consecutive years above the 5% cut score in terms of all schools in the state of Utah. They must have 2 consecutive years. If they are a Title I school and they fail to exit TSI, they are elevated to CSI, or Comprehensive Support Improvement Schools, which are designated on a cycle of 3 and/or 4 years. So 2018, and then we have a new designation this year, 2022, and then you can do the math in terms of when the next calculation or determination will be made. We still have some interesting challenges for schools that fail to achieve exit from TSI, and they know that they're not going to exit from TSI. Is when does their CSI designation begin? So stay tuned for that, as we have submitted revisions to our ESSA plan to the U.S. Department of Education. So there will be some changes, one of which will be with respect to identifying and exiting from CSI. But as I indicated earlier, the regular accountability is that 5% cutoff. So here's an example of a current targeted or TSI cohort. So the 2018 group, they were identified in 2018. Their clock began in the fall of 2019. So data was used as either a yes or no of being above or below that 5%. Year 2, 21-22, the fall of 22 data is being used to, again, either to exit or to indicate to the school that they have not exited. And then you'll see that year 3 and year 4. The next chart actually shows a couple of the different examples with the student groups to the left. And you can see the X's are that they did not achieve above the 5%. The check marks are they did. So in the first example with students with disabilities, year 1, no, year 2, no, year 3, yes, and year 4, yes, they exit. But in the other examples, you'll see, and I'll go down to our WH or our white students. Year 1 was a no, year 2 is yes, year 3 was yes. 2 years in a row means they exit. So they exited in year 3. And then you can see the other examples. So that was the 2018. And when you see now, as I mentioned, the data irregularities because of COVID, this is what happened with those schools 2019-20 and 2021, the accountability irregularities. So now they year 1, 21-22, follow 22 accountability results, the progress, and here's where they begin. And you can see that. I won't read it to you. I'm going to read the chat here real quick. Where's he wanted? Yes, Wendy, you are correct. And what she's referring to, that if you go onto the USB website Title I, you'll see under TSI, you will see 2018 and 2019 data is posted. If you see a cell that is blank on there, it's because they did not, that particular school did not have an N size of 10 or more, which means that that particular data point was not calculated as part of the school's performance. So we have moving forward. So in the conversations this year with LEAs, we've been very specific in identifying where there is a null, an NULL, as versus a no, NO, being very clear that in indicating that that is a student group that did not have an N size of 10 or greater. So, and if there are questions about that, please don't hesitate to reach out. We will do our best to explain that to you and walk through what you're looking at, and so that we're all on the same page with respect to that. Our worst fear, and I know it's yours as well, is to have inaccurate and incorrect information provided to you or to the schools. So this is an indication. So here's the 2018-2019 cohort using the accountability data. So the next is just an example of what that looks like for this particular cohort. So if Max, you could move that forward. And so here is the group that starts with 21-22. This is just their clock. So they have up until 24-25 to exit. And you'll see the same example, students with disabilities. So a no in the first 2 years. At year 3, the 20-24 is a yes. And then year 4 is a yes, they exit. And you'll see the same examples of what happens if a school is unable to score above that 5%. So that's just an example, and we will continue. Dr. Martin has done a fantastic job of providing this information in a workbook, a format for each of the LEAs, and has offered to meet with you and or a school if necessary to help explain in greater detail. So accessing or assessing TSI data, and as indicated, we have not posted the data in terms of TSI identification because we wanted to make sure that each LEA had the information first before it was made public. But it is nested on this URL where you can find under resources the 2018-19 and 2017-2018 data, and of which is referenced by Wendy's previous question in terms of it being blank, moving on an N size that was less than 10. So as I indicated, we are re-identifying using the word null to ensure that it is clear that it is a student group that does not have an N size of greater than 10. So for the fall 2022, and Dr. Martin, would you like to jump in on this?
Sure thing. There is a question from Dr. Dow about CSI schools that are Title I having access to additional funding as they have in the past. And yes, there is additional funding. It's specifically, some of the funding at least is earmarked specifically for having consultants come in and work with the school to create, to do a comprehensive needs assessment and a root cause analysis, and then also the opportunity to bring in a continuous improvement expert to assist with creating a plan a school improvement plan and then implementing that plan. So that's where most of the dollars are earmarked as far as CSI schools. And yes, we're anticipating that that will continue. Yeah, so we have identified schools in 2022. Sorry that I'm late. I was in another meeting until 10. But we have identified schools for 2022, the 2022 cohort, and have been meeting with LEAs. I don't want to repeat anything that Dr. Fern has already talked about, but we used 2021 and 2022 data to make determinations for this 2022 cohort. So you may have heard that 2021 wasn't used for exit, but it has been used for identification. So 2021 and 2022, those 2 consecutive years were used to identify new schools and student groups that are TSI starting this year. And there is no year 0. We tell people there's no year 0 with TSI. We jump right in. With CSI, there's a planning year, but with TSI, we jump right in, and the first set of data that we'll use for the 2022 cohort is 2023. So at the end of this school year, students will be taking the RISE, the Aspire, and that the WIDA will be happening in January, February, right? I think is when the window opens. And so we'll be taking all of that data and using it as per TSI. So can we advance the slide? I don't know. Okay, thank you. So we've been meeting with schools, and we are hoping that we can get a little bit of help from you, the Title I coordinators, to finish out, to round out our meetings that we've been having. So we have not been as successful with these particular districts and LEAs. So any support that you can help us with. We know that sometimes this information doesn't filter down to you as Title I directors or coordinators. And so we just want to make sure that you have this information. If you're not on this list, we've already met with your LEA and have shared the workbook that was specifically designed for your LEA, showing how your TSI schools have been performing since 2018, if you had any, and who your new schools and student groups are. But if you are on this list, anything you can do to help us out would be great. Our contact information is on the next slide, so you can email us, or well, we just have our email addresses, but we also have telephone numbers. You could call us and help us set up that meeting. Email tends to be a little bit easier. That's why we just have the email address here. So what questions do you have? And as I was saying, if your name is not on that previous slide, your LEA is not on that previous slide, and you still haven't heard anything about your TSI, then you probably need to talk to somebody in your organization that might have gotten that information, so that you can get access to that information, because we, like I said, shared it with a select few at the LEA, and most LEAs have opted to share that information out with their schools and with their stakeholders apart from us. So we just wanted to make sure everybody knew, and then now that folks know, hopefully they'll get that information distributed accordingly.
So Dr. Martin, we have 2 questions that you and I need to follow up with. The first has to do with CTE completer courses and how they're reported to the state as part of the indicator for readiness at the high school level. And the second has to do with initial placement and identification of our EL students. So you and I offline, we can find that answer and get that to Dr. Strong, so he can get it pushed out to the Title I directors.
Okay, great. What other questions do you have?
There is a question in the chat. It has been shared that Title I schools who do not exit TSI are identified as CSI. What happens to non-Title I schools that do not exit TSI?
So as part of ESSA, there is there is a designation called ATSI, and that means additional TSI. And so we will be figuring out as a center how to support non-Title I schools. There already is some state legislation that has gone through, which I'm sure Dr. Furness already mentioned, Elevate schools and Springboard schools. That has been a response to the needs of non-Title I schools that need some additional support for TSI. And as a center, we're looking at ways that we will support schools that don't exit with additional supports. At the initial outset of TSI, it's meant to be an LEA designation, or an LEA controlled support system. So we notify the LEAs, and then it's really up to them to monitor the creation of plans and to monitor the implementation of those plans. We're here as a support, as the Center for Continuous School Improvement, to help out if we're requested, but nothing is compliance driven as far as TSI at the state level. It's whatever the LEA decides to do. So ATSI, I assume, would include a little bit more direction from USBE. But again, we haven't gotten that far with any group yet because we had the pandemic. And so the most data that we have for any cohort is 2018. We have 2 years of data. Some groups have already exited as per that first cohort. And so we're excited about that. But we haven't gotten to the point where any TSI schools have entered into CSI status, or any non-Title I schools have gone beyond 4 years. And so we'll be figuring that out now. That we have resumed our accountability system. It was sort of interrupted there for the pandemic, but we'll be figuring all of that out.
And I just
yeah.
So Dr. Martin, I would just note, so part of what Dr. Martin was just explaining is included in our revision, our consolidated ESSA plan that's going to the U.S. Department of Education. So with respect to ATSI, additional targeted school improvement. So we're not at liberty just yet to give you details because that's still in process, but that's where you'll see some changes being made to our state accountability model based on our ESSA plan that's been resubmitted.
Sheena,
there was,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, Sheena, could you help us with what LEA you're in? I apologize. I should probably know this.
So as for CSI, if a school has been in CSI and they exit from CSI, they can immediately start generating data for TSI. So for example, schools that just exited from TSI, we're going to use the 2022 data as a first year and then 2023 data as a second year. So they could be identified for TSI student groups as soon as this next year. So there is a little bit of a window where when you're CSI, you would not be a double identified for TSI. So you wouldn't have to worry about that. But as soon as you exit from CSI, then you can be considered for TSI, but usually there's a small time frame. But we can help you out with that, Sheena. We'll reach out to you and talk a little bit more about that. And I should share your frustration, Wendy, about the lag in data, and we are working on that as an agency. I know that that's part of the conversation about how we get data out to schools sooner and in a more timely fashion. So thank you for sharing that, and we will continue to work on that. I understand the frustration there.
And then there's just one quick question from our Ames team on the readiness scores. Do they have equal weight?
Are you talking about the indicators as far as growth and achievement? Is that what you're referring to?
It's the high school readiness for AP.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so there's 25 points for graduation, 25 points for ACT, and 25 points for the readiness, the coursework. So we'll do a little bit more research on how the coursework is, that data is gathered and calculated, and because I understand that that's a question that we don't have an answer to, but yeah, all of those carry equal weight.
So I've noted 3. We have 3 items that we'll follow up with.
Excellent. Other questions for Dr. Fern, Dr. Martin?
I would just say that both Dr. Martin and I are available for any questions, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Sheena, either Dr. Martin or myself will follow back up with you after we get off this call later today. But please don't hesitate to reach out. Every time a question is asked, they are our friends, and it helps us get clear about either what we're saying or what we need to be looking at. So we appreciate your feedback, as well as I said, those questions at any time. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Thank you, Dr. Fern and Dr. Martin, our friends in the Center for Continuous School Improvement. If I can just express my gratitude for the work that they've done and the work that they continue to do. There are a lot of moving parts, and if I can just brag on what they have done in the past little while, I think I'm going to take the opportunity to do this. In 2015, if you can remember that far back, pre-pandemic, our state legislature approved and passed school turnaround. And this was done independent of federal school improvement under Title I. So there was a period of time where we were operating 2 school improvement initiatives that crossed paths in multiple schools. So through the work of the Center for Continuous School Improvement, we have been able to go to the legislature and change a large portion of that bill, that particular law, so that better meets the needs of Utah schools and better meets the needs of schools that need additional resources to provide for the achievement and growth of schools. That, combined with all of the work that the center has done on the ESSA plan, the Utah ESSA plan, because those changes are pretty monumental and they're big. And as that goes and is approved by the Department of Education, so goes the law of the land. And a lot of those changes that have been made, or the proposed changes in that plan, will really benefit the state and really utilize the resources in a better way. I know how many data meetings these folks attend, because in our office, we use Teams meetings. And so the chats are available. So when they're sitting through the data meetings, I just kind of watch in on all the chats, and they really do have your best interest. So thank you, Dr. Martin. Thank you, Dr. Fern, and our other members of the Center for Continuous School Improvement. We really appreciate the help and the relationship that we have together working for our schools. Thank you. And sorry, Dr. Martin, that we're a little ahead of schedule.
That's awesome that you guys are so efficient. I apologize for being late.
You weren't. Okay, let me share my screen again. And we have another big portion that's been really busy. And if you ever get the chance to watch every other board meeting, you've seen our friend Sarah Harward there explaining to the board every other month how we have utilized and spent and where this over $1 billion of funds has been going. So we know that there's in a lot of instances that this type of reporting or this type of tracking or this type of supervision falls on your shoulders, or at least you're part of that conversation. So we always think it's a good opportunity to have Sarah come in and explain what's going on, what's coming up with our CARES funding. Sarah, I'll turn the time over to you and I'll advance the slides when you tell me.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All righty, go ahead. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for letting me talk today. If you're dealing with the COVID funds, the ESSER, the GEAR funds, then you've probably heard a lot from me. So I hope that's okay. But I just wanted to come and give a couple updates and some thank yous of things we've done previous this year and what's upcoming this next year. First off, the ending of the CARES fund. So this is the ESSER 1 and GEAR 1 funds. So those, the end of the grant period was September 30th. And then we had an additional 45 days to get your reimbursements in. So I appreciate everyone who got those reimbursements in. We did really well. I appreciate, you putting up with my monthly emails to biweekly to weekly to phone calls. So thank you so much for utilizing these funds, getting those reimbursement requests in. It's looking really good. We got over 99% of the ESSER 1 and over 97% of the GEAR 1 funds to you, to your schools, your teachers, your students. So we appreciate your hard work on that. Because these funds have now ended, any equitable services, we just wanted to remind you that you're providing to your non-public schools. If they have any concerns as you're wrapping those up with them, please have them reach out to us for the EANS funds, which came out with the CRISA and the ARP funds. We do have additional funding to support those non-public schools. So please send them our way if they are having any issues with any services or supplies that they need to continue responding to the pandemic. Next slide. Thank you. All right. So earlier this year, well, a lot earlier this year now in spring, we did the huge ESSER GEAR annual federal reports, and we did have to reach out to you to collect some data on FY21 for the ESSER 1, the GEAR 1, and the ESSER 2 awards. So I appreciate all those who submitted the data for our survey, who helped collect that data so that we could provide that data to the U.S. Department of Education. We're happy to report that thanks to your efforts, all the reports were completed by the deadline and submitted on time, and everything so far looks good. We haven't heard anything different from them. So again, we just appreciate you helping us complete that data collection. And I did want to point out that we have communicated the challenges of the data. I know some of the data points were very specific. We weren't prepared for a lot of the data that they wanted back, FY21 for like summer school counts and whatnot. So we have communicated the challenges of this data collection to the U.S. Department of Education, just letting them know that, a little bit of the difficulty of collecting such specific data. I just wanted to give you a heads up that this last spring, we only reported on FY21. And in FY21, we only had awarded ESSER 1, GEAR 1, and ESSER 2. This next year, when we do the ESSER GEAR annual federal report, it'll be on FY22, where we have all of the ESSERs and GEARs. So ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ARP ESSER, and GEAR 1 and GEAR 2. So we've got a report on all of them this coming year. They told us, the U.S. Department of Education told us that the questions are going to be the same as what we did in spring of this last year. But knowing them, it could very well change. So I'll try to, if you would like to know the questions like in advance, or if you would like me to share what we did, what was collected last year, please feel free to reach out. But as soon as we get the finalized questions from the U.S. Department of Ed, our goal is to get them to you as soon as possible so that you have the most amount of time to collect that data. And we go through and make sure that if there's any data that we already collect as an agency, we don't ask you for it again. So that's our goal in that. So just be prepared with this next spring that we'll be reporting on all three ESSERs and both GEARs. All right, thank you. Next slide. All right, a reminder about capital projects. So this is for our ARP ESSER funds. Mainly just because there is that limit on the ESSER 2 from SB 1 from legislative session last year. If you're going to do a construction or renovation project, you need to complete our ARP ESSER capital project application. This is separate from the ARP ESSER application that you put in Utah grants, where you planned all your funds. If you put in that application that you're going to be doing construction or renovation, there needs to be this additional application. And this is just so that we can cover, number one, that you're following just the construction renovation guidelines, the Davis-Bacon requirements, your local procurement requirements. And then second, because ARP ESSER, we do have to have 20% of your total award going towards learning loss. We just want to make sure budget wise that everything looks okay so that you don't get in any auditing risks with going over that 80% that you could spend on anything other than learning loss. So please, there's a link to the slides in the application in the slide. It's just on our COVID page of our website. You'll fill out that application just with your budget and what your plan is, how it relates to COVID. You'll submit it to us and we get back to you typically within 7 to 10 business days. We try to be faster than that, just so you can get started on your project. Please complete these applications before you start the project, just so we can make sure everything's good. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Just an additional reminder when it comes to the Davis-Bacon Act requirements for the construction and renovation projects. This is in the application. When you apply, you agree to follow these requirements where you pay workers no less than the locally prevailing wage and fringe benefits for corresponding work in the area. So this does require a weekly certification of payroll reports. And this has been brought up from our partners at CCSSO as well as Department of Ed, that this is starting to become an audit finding where our LEAs are not keeping their Davis-Bacon requirements. We haven't had that issue in Utah yet, but other states have. So we just wanted to make sure that you are doing this. If you aren't doing those weekly certifications, please obtain a certificate to date that you were paying in accordance with the requirements, and then from then on, start doing the weekly certification. If you do have any questions on that, please let us know. But I do want to let you know, we don't need those weekly certifications like in Utah grants when it comes to your reimbursement requests. Just keep those on file for any monitoring or auditing purposes. That's it. Thank you. All right, next, we're going to start monitoring ESSER and GEAR funds. This has come down from superintendency that they would like us to start doing this. So we're going to start doing site visits for monitoring ESSER and GEAR funds. We're going to try to make them as short and painless as possible because we do gather so much documentation in Utah grants for your reimbursement requests. But we do need to start doing these. When we contact you for a visit, we'll provide you with any questions that we're going to ask or items that we plan to follow up on. But indicators that your LEA will be monitored are those who have not completed the revision of their ARP ESSER application in Utah grants. We have a couple LEAs that submitted their ARP ESSER application and we had to send it back for revision, and we haven't gotten those back yet. We would really like to get you awarded these funds so that you can start utilizing them and requesting reimbursement. Another indicator is those who have not requested a reasonable portion of their ESSER funds. So this is just if you haven't started requesting ESSER 2, ARP ESSER. I know we just wrapped up ESSER 1 and we were really pushing to get that one done. But if you haven't started requesting ESSER 2 or ARP ESSER, no, you might get a call from us just so we can follow up, make sure if there's anything that we can do to help you get those reimbursement requests through. Lastly, those who are completing construction or renovation projects, we will follow up, looking at those Davis-Bacon requirements, local procurement, just all those things that you see in the application that we're going to follow up on. Okay, next. All right. I think so. Late liquidation of ESSER and GEAR funds. So you might have heard that the U.S. Department of Education back in September released a Dear Colleague letter regarding ESSER 1 and GEAR 1 funds and the opportunity for late liquidation. What late liquidation would do is give us an additional 14 months, which would total up to 18 months after the obligation period of September 30th to continue delivery of goods and services through the liquidation period. So I've linked the template for that request here in the slide, but as far as the application process goes, we will submit one application as a state on behalf of all the LEAs. So what it looks like, and you can look at, it's just an Excel file, and I'll go through, and if you want to submit a project for late liquidation, I will go through and fill out one line per LEA per project. So that's something I will submit on behalf of our state. We decided that we weren't going to apply for late liquidation for ESSER 1 and GEAR 1. We just didn't really see a need, didn't really hear interest from our LEAs. But we have heard interest as far as ESSER 2 and a lot of interest for ARP-ESSER, just because that would give us additional time for you to complete any construction or renovation projects. So I hope that's okay. We're not planning on applying. We do have till the end of December. So yeah, we aren't applying for ESSER 1, but we likely will for ESSER 2, and we really most likely will for ARP-ESSER. So as those come around next year, we can't even start applying until after the obligation period of the award. So if we do want to apply for ESSER 2, we can't even start applying until after September 30th of next year. So we'll kind of get a feel when it gets closer if you do want us to apply for ESSER 2. And then I'll just need to gather a little bit of data on what project you want to apply for, the total amount of funds, and then just the reasoning for the extension for the late liquidation. So if you have any questions, again, just feel free to contact me. Next slide. Yeah, that's it. Okay, that was it. So if you have any questions right now, please feel free to ask away, or just feel free to reach out to myself or Armella. She's our CARES administrative secretary. So thank you.
What questions do you have for Sarah and Armella regarding CARES funds?
This is Aaron Grant. Sorry, I don't have my camera on. So for the ARPS, if the late liquidation approval is accepted, the original date or current date for reimbursements is September 2024. What would the new date be if granted this approval?
Yeah, absolutely. So that would give us an additional 18 months. Hold on, I'm just looking up.
And Sarah, and if you wouldn't mind, would you mind repeating Dr. Wilson's question?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so his question was, if we did apply for late liquidation for ARP-ESSER, which ends September 30th of 2024, where would that put us ending if we did apply for late liquidation? So for ARP-ESSER, that ends September 30th, 2024. If we did late liquidation, that would give us till March 31st of 2026. So quite a bit longer. So yeah, about a year and a half longer. So.
Thanks, Aaron. What additional questions do you have for Sarah and Armella?
Well, I'll just ask one more. What do you think the likelihood of them allowing this late liquidation to do? I mean, we can't bet on it, certainly, but do you feel positive about it?
Yeah, so Aaron asked what's the likelihood that we would get approved for late liquidation. I think it's fairly likely, especially when it comes to ARP-ESSER and the construction projects, just because nationwide we are seeing supply shortages and supply chain issues. So that's something that the U.S. Department is very aware of. So I feel like that would likely get approved. One of the nice things about us not applying for ESSER 1 is that we can watch how it's happening for other states, what the process is, how long it takes for them to get approved, that kind of thing. So we'll know a little bit more as it kind of keeps going for other states, and we'll let you know. But I would say because the U.S. Department of Ed is aware of like those nationwide issues, I feel like they would likely get approved. So.
Very good. Thank you, Sarah, for all you do.
Yeah, and Sarah, there, we spent some time in DC last summer meeting with the feds, speaking about late liquidation and these funds. And there are a lot of steps that have to go into approval for these things, but these would be funds that if we cannot have them spent, they get sent back to the Treasury, which makes it difficult for the Department of Ed to ask for any increases in funding moving forward. So hopefully that would happen.
Yeah, definitely. And I will just say too, the goal really is to get them spent by the deadline. So ESSER 2, September 30th of next year, and ARP-ESSER, September 30th of 2024. So I would be pushing for that goal. Late liquidation is just if we can't do it, because there are barriers like supply chain issues or the construction projects, that kind of thing. So just try to get them spent by that deadline, but if not, like, this is just an option. So one of the things that they haven't really answered yet is, like, if you're in the middle of a construction project and September 30th hits, like 2024, do you have to stall the project until we get the application approved? Because like I said, we can't even start the application process until the period of performance is over. So and they take applications through December. It could take months for them to get approved. So they haven't really answered if we have to like stall projects while the application is being approved. So that could create some issues. So do your best to use the funds by the end of the grant program. So, but late liquidation is there in case we do need it.
It's just wait time, Sarah.
ARPS expires September 2024, right?
Sorry, Aaron, you cut out. I didn't hear your question.
September 2024, right? So we can't, so I originally thought that we could apply this September to extend the September 2024 date if needed. Obviously, we won't know, we're going to try to spend. So are you saying that the application, the Department of Ed, we apply only when the grant is ended? Okay, so the ARPS, we're really not applying this September, we're applying the following September.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, this coming September, we can apply for ESSER 2. We have to wait till 2024 September to apply for ESSER 3. So.
Thanks, Sarah.
For sure.
Any last questions for Sarah regarding CARES funds? Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate it. I think it's important. I've heard from a number of colleagues who, especially those who are in districts who have been impacted by the decrease in Title I funding. It's kind of a unique situation in that there's a decrease of one funding source, yet there seems to be quite an abundance of another funding source. So I've seen budget revisions come in to try to mitigate some of that loss from Title I funds. Sarah's really good about, she's like she knows everything about this stuff. So she hears from me about 10 times a day with questions about this. Reach out to her, reach out to Armella if you have questions about CARES funding. I will say this too, just as an aside, we have a new board coming on. So the next time that Sarah presents to the new board, the questions should be quite interesting. I will be there in attendance, riveted. So thank you, Sarah, and thanks, Armella, for that support.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to end on a couple of pieces of good news. Distinguished Title I schools. I want to say that the National Association of ESEA State Program Administrators, or affectionately known as NASPA, and they're the one who puts on the National ESEA Conference annually. Every year they provide for a recognition of 2 per state distinguished Title I schools. And we can nominate or elect to send 2 schools in 2 of these 3 categories. The first category is exceptional student performance and academic growth for 2 or more consecutive years. Category 2, closing the achievement gap between student groups for 2 or more consecutive years. And then the third category is excellence in serving special populations of students. For example, homeless, migrant, English learners, multilingual learners, refugees, etc. So there is some general criteria to qualify to be nominated and recognized as a distinguished Title I school for Utah. You must have at least 40% of your students qualify under free and reduced lunch for that selected year, operating a Title I program in the school, and rank in the highest performing 10% of Title I schools for 2 or more consecutive years. So that first category would be in the top 5% of Title I schools, and that is your achievement for 2 or more consecutive years. And then in the second category, in the bottom or in the highest 10% performing Title I schools in the state, as well as the third category for student groups. One disclaimer is you can't be recognized or identified as a springboard, elevate, comprehensive support and improvement school, or a targeted support and improvement school under ESSA. So any of those categories are the nominations. So the process is we work with data and statistics to get a ranked list of 2 consecutive years of Title I schools in the state. Those schools that fit this or match this criteria are sent a nomination form. It's sent to the superintendent of the LEA or the director of a charter school to nominate their school and complete an application explaining how the school has fulfilled this criteria and why they should be recognized as a Utah Title I school and nationally as the Title I distinguished school from Utah as one of the 2. So those applications are sent out. We collect those applications and then an internal committee reviews them in comparison with the data, the achievement and growth data of that particular school. And then we select 2 from those 3 categories. So Utah can select 2 schools for this reward. So the 2 schools, a drum roll, that have been selected as a national distinguished Title I school and will be recognized at the ESEA National Conference in February are Creekview Elementary in Carbon District under Category 1 and Category 2 Fountain Green Elementary in North Sanpete District. I had a really good conversation with the principal in Creekview Elementary who has some questions. As part of the recognition, that particular district, Carbon District, on behalf of Creekview Elementary, will be awarded $15,000. The intent of that funding is to select a team from Creekview Elementary to go to the national conference in Indianapolis, Indiana, the first week in February, and be recognized there as a national distinguished Title I school. His question is, we're really having problems getting substitutes and getting staff who can fill in for other staff. What do other LEAs or what have other LEAs done in this instance to be able to send a team to this recognition, for this recognition? And that's a question out there. So if you have been in this boat, we'll be in contact with you to provide some help for them. I will say this, they'll still get the $15,000. Congratulations.
Congratulations. And then quick question, can we know which student group Fountain Green was able to close the gap with?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to dig up the application, but I can certainly send you that information.
I asked just because we're trying, of course, to close our own gaps. And if it's a similar one to us, I might reach out and see what they're doing.
Yeah, sure. Actually, I can send it to you if Robin gives me the okay. Apparently last year she wrote a published paper regarding what they were doing for their particular student groups in that school. So if Robin says it's okay, I can certainly share that with you. That'd
That's
be great.
awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Hey, Max.
Yeah.
The student group was the lowest 25%.
Oh, that's right, Val. Thank you. Lowest 25%. You're right. Thank you. Okay, any questions about distinguished Title I schools? Or what are your questions about distinguished Title I schools? Okay, moving on. I'm pretty excited about this. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, and I'm not sure that Sarah Lynn has been able to break away from what she's doing because she's in a different time zone than us. Hopefully she's available here with us. But I was talking with, or previously speaking with Assistant Superintendent Leah Voorhees, and the special education department here at USBE has a subscription to the special ed admin website resources. And sorry, I was looking at the chat there. And it's been a resource that's been very valuable for them. So they went into a partnership, into an agreement with LRP Publications to be able to provide that subscription to the entire state, anybody who wanted access to those resources for special education. So she talked to me about potentially looking into having a subscription for the Title I admin. Oh, good, Sarah Lynn's here. For Title I admin. So we did look into it, and fortunately we had funds available that were expiring to be able to purchase this subscription for the whole state of Utah. So I'm excited today to introduce you to Sarah Lynn Branson, who is the coordinator for implementation and support for Title I admin. And I'm going to turn the time over to her to talk about this resource and this opportunity for you. So I will stop sharing. And we practiced this week, so hopefully this works out.
Thank you so much, Max. Can everyone hear me? Just someone can raise their hand. Great. Awesome. Hi. I am so excited to be invited to attend your meeting today and present Title1admin.com on behalf of LRP Media. I am going to shut my camera off once we get into actually logging into the site to show you all of the incredible resources that exist. A little bit of a history, Title1admin.com is the premier online resource for information and practical guidance for your Title I program. Title1admin.com features and resources include policy letters from the U.S. Department of Education, federal statutes and regulations, sample forms, monitoring reports, and many other resources. We also have exclusive material written by our Title I experts and attorneys. I know that you all in the state of Utah are going to find this website a vital resource to administrating an effective and compliant Title I program. So a few things to note about LRP Media and Title I Admin. So we're so happy and pleased to be partnering with the Department of Education in Utah to bring this vital resource to you. What you get is unlimited support through Title1admin.com. So that means unlimited phone support, email support, updating your account, ensuring that any of your staff has complimentary sessions and overviews of the website so that they know how to navigate and get the best out of the features. We'll also be continuing to stay in touch with you about content that is specific not only to Utah, but to your specific district, things that you're looking for, that you need information on. We like to keep that flow of communication open so we can keep the information relative to you. So what's going to happen next after this meeting is that my partner in crime, Teresa Haar, will be emailing you a letter with a license agreement and a staff list for you to return to us. From there, we're asking if you give us a few days, we'll get you set up with your login information to access the website on your own. Included in that welcome letter with your access information is also going to be links for any of your designated staff to log in and enjoy a complimentary overview as well. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to turn off my camera and I'm going to log into the site. Okay, let's share my screen. So these are your next steps for you. And of course, I picked out nice pictures of Utah because Max and I have spoken at length, but I have visited your state often and I feel very at home in Utah. And I'm so happy to be your support and implementation coordinator here for you at LRP and for Title I admin. So here's Teresa's email that you'll be receiving from her, thar@lrp.com. Look for that after you wrap up your meeting today. And then you'll receive ongoing support. And don't forget that all of your staff is entitled to a complimentary overview, and you all receive that support from me, your coordinator. That is basically everything that I have.
Sarah Lynn, thank you very much. Just last time, what questions do you have for Sarah Lynn regarding the website? Well, and Sarah Lynn, I know you visited here, but everybody, I've been giving them updates because my daughters left me in the valley and went skiing this morning. So just as an update, the powder's knee deep and it's not crowded. So
Hey, Max, it's Sun Valley this year. I'm sorry.
well,
Next
thank you
year.
so much. I really appreciate this. Jandy asked a question a little earlier about who's going to receive the email from Teresa. And we sent to LRP our Title I contact list. So the Title I directors, that was our initial contact list for this. So as Sarah Lynn explained, from there, you can decide who in your team, your staff, your schools, you would like to be able to access the Title I admin resources. Isn't that right, Becky Peters? That's who we sent that. That's the contact list we sent.
Correct.
Thank you.
So I have a question on that. Is that then you said schools, so is that something we can give to principals as well, or just for the LEA?
Sarah Lynn, I think that's a question for you.
I can clarify that for you, but in your district, yes, you get to determine who should have access to the site. If that is the principal, if that's that they need the information that you want them to have access so that they can assist with staying compliant, absolutely, you get to determine that for your district, for your LEAs, for your schools.
Thanks, Sarah Lynn. Other questions for Sarah Lynn before we, like I said, she's in a different time zone. Thank you for, this was the first Tuesday after a holiday weekend. And so we got a little excited and we're moving a little fast. So we really appreciate you being available, Sarah Lynn, and being a little early, and we apologize for that, but thank you very much for being here.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. And of course, I'll be in touch with the directors as they send back their agreements, and Max, you and I will stay in touch. And thank you all so very much. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you. I was pretty excited about the resource because I don't know about you, but oftentimes, questions will come up or there will be something that's a little unclear that's not specific to Utah grants, but it's something specific or not necessarily specific to Title I. And so where do you go that's beyond just the law or the regulation? And so this resource has been very effective for special ed directors. They've used it a lot. The feedback, because I asked a number of them what they thought about it, and they use it extensively. So I was excited to be able for us to have this resource available to everybody. Just before we go off here, Jeff, are you here? Jeff Ojeda?
I am indeed.
Excellent. I just want to turn the time over. We didn't have Jeff on the agenda, but this is kind of a new update. And Darlene, no, there is not a cost for the licensed agreement. That cost is already, we used expiring Title I funds to pay for that cost for everybody. So it's a state subscription. Sorry, Jeff. So I asked Jeff, there's a new or an extending opportunity under one of Jeff's programs. One of the things that he has newly been the administrator for. So I wanted to let him explain what that is and then what's coming up for that. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Max. Hello, everybody. I appreciate the time, and I won't keep you very long at all. I just wanted to give you a follow-up to my previous message in your last meeting, in which we announced that there was a grant available to all LEAs called the Homeless Teen Center Grant Program. And we were given by the legislators, $3.5 million to create these homeless teen centers throughout the state in your LEAs. We had 6 of them apply, or 6 LEAs apply for this first round that we just went through. And everyone received the maximum amount of $250,000, which means that we still have additional funds to get out. So we are opening it up for a second round. That opening should happen sometime soon. You should see a message through Utah Grants come to you and anybody that is attached to Utah Grants for your LEA. So your business admin, yourself, someone, perhaps a homeless liaison in your district or charter, should receive that message as well. But we wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. All of the documentation has been submitted for Utah Grants to open that up. So we're just waiting for them to get that done. I don't have a specific date for you, but I'm looking ideally within the next week or so, maybe a little bit longer, to get that opened and available to you. It'll be open for a month from the time that it does open. So you'll have plenty of time to look at that even with the holidays coming. But we just wanted to make sure that you were aware that that was going to be available for you. And again, the grant is titled the Homeless Teen Center Grant Program. If you go into Utah Grants and you do a search under HTCGP or teen, it'll come right up. And I'm happy to answer any questions, but if there are none, then turn the time back to Max.
What questions do you have for Jeff?
I have a question. Is there a minimum of how many students who fall into the MKV category to be able to apply for this?
No, there is not a minimum, which is great, which means that it's a really open to any LEA that wants to create a center. The funds can be used for purchasing a building, changing a building, drawing up plans, architectural plans for a building. It can be used for converting a current space into a homeless teen center. So it really is open in many, many ways that usually funding that we see isn't. It's really, really broad in its range, but again, because of the title, Homeless Teen Center, should be in a secondary school. But other than that, having laundry, that is a washer and a dryer, and having a shower available for people, there really aren't a whole lot of other restrictions on those funds. So it's available to anybody in any LEA that wishes to apply. So we hope that you will.
Sorry, one more question. We're from an online school, so we have to kind of think outside of the box a little bit. Is this only for infrastructure, or would we be able to, because we have students throughout the entire state, would we be able to think outside the box of ways we can support our students in this situation?
Well, it is specific to homeless teens. That's the only specification. In regards to whether it's brick and mortar, the board rule states that it can be used for brick and mortar. It does not say that it can't be used for online. So I would encourage you to apply. And even if you, for some reason, weren't able to get full funding, I think that the committee that reviews the applications is anxious to award this type of program, and anything that you can come up with, even online, that you feel may be helpful for your students that are homeless, I would certainly say go for it. There's no reason not to. And we'll get back to you if there are questions or concerns, or if the committee wants you to make some changes to that. We'll have those discussions as we move forward. But yeah, there's no reason for you not to apply. So I hope that's an incentive enough for you to kind of look at your situation and be creative about it, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Jeff, there's one more question from Jill in the chat.
Okay. Sorry, let me pull up the chat real quick. How much do we have time do we have to spend the funds? They are state funds. If you're doing building and addiction and are waiting on construction, it's on a reimbursement basis, so you won't get those funds up front. So you can, once you have kind of obligated those funds and made that known through Utah Grants that you're expecting a reimbursement, then that reimbursement will happen. But it's state money, it's not federal money. So all the state money rules apply. Can I put the grant link in the chat? I can't, because it hasn't been updated yet. The first round closed, so that link is no longer available. And the new second round will be available sometime soon, but I don't have that available yet because it's not been set up in Utah Grants to be awarded yet. So once it is, though, we'll get it to Max and then you guys can have access to it that way. Please know that your liaisons, your McKinney-Vento liaisons, will also be getting an email when it is available. So you can keep tabs with them in regards to whether they've received that or not. But at the same time, I will send that out also to Max and he will get it out to everybody, all of you in this call as well.
Thanks, Jeff. Last call for questions for Jeff. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate you being available to provide that opportunity and that information regarding that opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for giving me a moment. Bye,
You
everybody.
bet. Well, just to wrap up, just a couple of heads up. The Title I application and DMI, the deadline for that is coming up shortly. December 1st is what we set in Utah Grants. We do understand that there have been a couple of outlier occasions that are causing difficulty, and we are working through that. We will keep it in mind as we get close to December 1st, but please try to meet that deadline. The National ESEA Conference in Indianapolis, Indiana is in person and virtual, February 1st through 4th, 2023 already. And then the next Title I Directors Meeting is Wednesday, March 29th, 8:30 to 12. We have set this up initially as a virtual meeting. We'll reach out to see if there is cause or reason, or if we can even have the meeting in person, if that's where people's interests lie. I will also include in this slide the contact list of all our USBE folks. Before we go, does anybody have any questions, comments, last statements? Well, thank you very much. As we have done in the past couple of meetings, if I can get those who can from USBE to stay on this Zoom meeting, for those of you who want to stay on and ask questions that are specific to your LEA or your school, or questions that you may have for one of us on USBE staff, we will stay on here until we get that chance to talk to you. Well, everybody, if I don't see you before then, I hope you get some time off in the next couple of weeks and months. I hope that I get the chance to get up there to that knee-deep powder that my two daughters are torturing me with. And I want you to know how much I appreciate you. Should you have questions or need things, please reach out to us. We're happy to hear from you. Even if you don't have a question, we're still just happy to hear from you. Val, good point, and I want to bring that up. So the DMI instructions, there's a link I emailed to you, as well as the Title I application. There's a how-to instructions. And if you need me, I can email that out to you again. This meeting has been recorded except for the Title I admin piece of it because it's proprietary. However, should you want Sarah Lynn or her team to come to your LEA or to virtually do a presentation about the Title I admin resources, she has said that she is available to do that for anybody who wants it. That's what they do. So though we didn't have that on the recording of this meeting, she can do that in person for you, specific to your LEA or school or staff or team. Once Becky gets this PowerPoint so that it's ADA compliant, we'll send it out to you as well as the recording of this meeting. And on that note, thank you, everybody. It was good to see some of your names and some of your faces.